Elena Vasquez had learned a long time ago that the best way to survive in a rich man's house was to become invisible. She had mastered this art over the past 3 years, moving through the Morrison estate like a shadow, cleaning rooms before anyone woke up, arranging fresh flowers in vases that cost more than her monthly rent, and disappearing before the family sat down for dinner. At 42 years old, she had accepted this life. Not because she wanted it, but because life had a way of taking your dreams and replacing them with responsibilities. She lived in a small apartment on the other side of the city with her 2 children. Her daughter, Rosa, was 19 and working her way through community college. Her son, Miguel, was 16 and spent most of his time studying, determined to become an engineer one day. Everything Elena did was for them. Every floor she scrubbed, every dish she washed, every moment of humiliation she swallowed with a polite smile. It was all for them. The Morrison estate sat on 12 acres of perfectly maintained land. The mansion itself had 23 rooms, though Elena suspected that Richard Morrison, the owner, had never stepped foot in most of them. He was a real estate developer, a man who had built his fortune buying old buildings, tearing them down, and putting up expensive condos in their place. The newspapers called him a visionary. The people who lost their homes called him something else. But Elena kept her opinions to herself. She was not paid to think. She was paid to clean. On this particular Friday evening, the estate was buzzing with activity. Richard Morrison was hosting his annual charity gala, an event that brought together the wealthiest people in the city. They would drink champagne that cost $500 a bottle, eat food prepared by a celebrity chef, and write checks to various causes so they could feel good about themselves. Elena had seen it all before. She was not supposed to be working tonight. The gala staff was different from the regular household staff. They wore black uniforms and were trained to serve at high-end events. But one of the servers had called in sick at the last minute, and the catering manager had begged Elena to fill in. "I'll pay you double," he had said on the phone. "Please, Elena, I'm desperate." She had agreed, not because of the money, though the money certainly helped. She had agreed because saying no had never been something she was good at. Now she stood in the service hallway, adjusting the uncomfortable white gloves they had given her. Through the door, she could hear the orchestra playing, the clinking of glasses, the polite laughter of people who had never worried about paying a bill in their lives. "Remember," the catering manager whispered to the serving staff, "you are invisible. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make eye contact. Offer the food, smile, and move on. Understood?" Everyone nodded. Elena took a deep breath and stepped into the grand ballroom. The room was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm, golden light over everything. The walls were decorated with paintings that probably cost more than most people's houses. Women in designer gowns floated across the marble floor, diamonds sparkling at their throats and wrists. Men in perfectly tailored suits discussed business deals while sipping whiskey from heavy crystal glasses. And in the corner of the room, near the tall windows that overlooked the garden, sat a piano. Elena's heart stopped for just a moment when she saw it. It was a Steinway grand piano, its black surface polished to a mirror shine. She knew exactly what it was. She knew exactly how much it cost, and she knew, with a certainty that made her chest ache, exactly how it would feel to play it. But those days were behind her. That was another life, another Elena. The woman who stood here now, holding a silver tray of appetizers, had no connection to the girl who had once performed on stages across 2 continents. Or so she told herself. She forced her eyes away from the piano and began moving through the crowd, offering stuffed mushrooms and tiny portions of salmon on crackers. Most people took the food without looking at her. Some didn't even acknowledge her presence, reaching past her as if she were a piece of furniture. She was used to this. It no longer hurt the way it once did. She spotted Richard Morrison near the center of the room, surrounded by a group of admirers. He was a tall man in his late 50s, with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. His suit probably cost more than Elena made in 6 months. He laughed loudly at something one of his guests said, clapping the man on the shoulder like they were old friends. Elena had worked in his house for 3 years, and he had spoken directly to her exactly 4 times. once to complain about a spot on a window, once to tell her she had used the wrong type of flowers in the dining room, once to ask where his daughter was, and once, just once, to say thank you when she had found his missing cufflinks. She moved to the other side of the room, staying close to the walls, trying to remain as invisible as possible. That was when she noticed Morrison's daughter, Chloe, standing alone near the dessert table. Chloe was different from her father. At 25 years old, she had her father's money but none of his arrogance. Elena had cleaned her room many times and had noticed the books on social justice stacked on her nightstand, the volunteer appreciation certificates framed on her wall. Chloe always said hello to the staff, always asked how they were doing, and always seemed genuinely interested in the answer. Now Chloe looked uncomfortable in her expensive dress, watching the crowd with the expression of someone who would rather be anywhere else. She caught Elena's eye and gave her a small, tired smile. Elena nodded politely and continued on her rounds. The evening dragged on. Elena's feet began to ache in the uncomfortable shoes she had been given. Her tray grew heavy, then light, then heavy again, as she made trips back to the kitchen. Through it all, her eyes kept drifting back to that piano in the corner. No one was playing it. No one had touched it all evening. It sat there, beautiful and silent, like a bird in a cage. She remembered a time when music had been her entire world. She remembered the feeling of keys beneath her fingers, the way a melody could lift her out of her body and carry her somewhere else entirely. She remembered the audiences, the applause, the reviews that called her a rising star, and she remembered how quickly it had all fallen apart. She pushed the memories away. There was no point in thinking about the past. The past was gone. All she had was tonight, this job, these trays of food, and the hope that her children would have better lives than she did. But even as she told herself this, she could feel the piano watching her from across the room, waiting. As if it knew something she had forgotten, as if it knew that before this night was over, everything was about to change. The accident happened just after 10 o'clock. Elena had been working for nearly 4 hours by then. Her feet were screaming inside the tight black shoes. Her back ached from carrying heavy trays. But she kept moving, kept smiling, kept pretending that she was fine. This was the job. This was what she had signed up for. The crowd had grown louder as the night went on. The champagne was flowing freely now, and the guests had lost some of their stiff politeness. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings. Voices overlapped in conversations about vacation homes and stock markets and which private school was best for children. Elena was making her way through the crowd with a fresh tray of appetizers when she noticed the woman standing near the piano. Her name was Victoria Thornton, and she was exactly the kind of person Elena had learned to avoid. She was in her 60s, thin as a rail, with silver hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face. Diamonds hung from her ears and circled her wrists. Her dress was a deep burgundy silk that probably cost more than Elena's car. But it was not the woman's wealth that made Elena nervous. It was the way she looked at people. Victoria Thornton had the kind of eyes that measured everyone's worth in seconds and found most people lacking. Elena had seen her snap at one of the other servers earlier for bringing the wrong type of napkin. Elena tried to move past her quickly, but the crowd was thick in this part of the room. People kept stepping backward without looking, blocking her path. She had to navigate carefully, keeping her tray balanced while avoiding elbows and champagne glasses and sudden movements. She was almost past Victoria Thornton when it happened. A man in a gray suit took a sudden step backward, his heel catching Elena's ankle. She stumbled, just a small stumble, nothing dramatic, but her shoulder bumped into Victoria Thornton's arm at exactly the wrong moment. The woman was holding a glass of red wine. The glass tipped, the wine spilled, and a dark red stain spread across the front of Victoria Thornton's silk dress like a blooming flower. For a moment, the world went silent. Then Victoria Thornton screamed. It was not a loud scream, but it was sharp enough to cut through the noise of the party. People turned to look. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The orchestra continued playing for a few more seconds before trailing off into confused silence. "You stupid, clumsy woman." Victoria Thornton's voice was shaking with anger. "Do you have any idea what you've done? This dress is a one-of-a-kind designer piece. Elena's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. I'm so sorry. Ma'am, I'm so terribly sorry. Please, let me help you. Don't touch me. Victoria stepped back as if Elena carried some kind of disease. Just look at this. Look at what you've done. People were gathering now, forming a circle around them. Elena could feel their eyes on her, judging her, pitying her, enjoying the spectacle. Her cheeks burned with shame. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the marble floor, and never come back up. What's going on here? The crowd parted, and Richard Morrison stepped into the circle. His face was already tight with irritation. Elena watched his eyes move from Victoria Thornton's ruined dress to the tray still trembling in Elena's hands. Understanding dawned on his face, followed quickly by anger. What happened? He demanded. Victoria Thornton pointed a bony finger at Elena. This servant spilled wine all over me. My dress is completely destroyed. Richard, this is absolutely unacceptable. Morrison turned to Elena. His eyes were cold, the kind of cold that made her feel like she was less than human. Is this true? Is this true? It was an accident, sir, Elena said quietly. Someone bumped into me from behind. I lost my balance for just a moment. I'm very sorry. An accident. Morrison repeated the word, like it tasted bad in his mouth. He looked around at his guests, at the important people watching this scene unfold, and Elena could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. He was embarrassed. His perfect party had been disrupted, and someone needed to pay for that. This is what happens, he said loudly, making sure everyone could hear, when you hire people who don't understand how to behave in civilized company. A few guests laughed nervously. Morrison was warming up now, feeding off the attention. I should have known better than to let the regular staff work an event like this. These people have no training, no education, no understanding of how things work in our world. Elena stood frozen, her tray still in her hands. She wanted to defend herself. She wanted to tell him that she had more education than most people in this room, that she had traveled to more countries than he probably had, that she had performed for audiences who appreciated real talent and not just expensive decorations. But she said nothing. Because she needed this job. Because her children needed her to have this job. Because fighting back would only make things worse. Morrison gestured toward the piano behind her. She probably doesn't even know what this instrument is. Do you? He was looking at Elena now, a cruel smile on his face. Do you even know what kind of piano that is? More laughter from the crowd. Louder this time, more confident. Elena felt something crack inside her chest. It was a small crack, barely noticeable. But it was there. Years of silence, years of bowing her head and accepting insults, years of pretending that she was okay with being treated like nothing, all of it pressed against that crack. But still, she said nothing. That's what I thought. Morrison shook his head in disgust. Someone get this woman out of here and find something to help Victoria clean up. And make sure she's docked for the damage to the dress. Elena nodded, her eyes fixed on the floor. She turned to leave, to escape back to the service hallway, where no one would see the tears building in her eyes. But then a voice cut through the murmuring crowd. Father, that's enough. Chloe Morrison stepped forward, her face flushed with embarrassment not for herself, but for her father. She had been watching from the edge of the circle, and now she positioned herself between Elena and the crowd. It was an accident, Chloe said firmly. Morrison's smile faltered. Chloe, to stay out of this. No. Chloe's voice was quiet but steady. You've made your point. Let her go. Father and daughter stared at each other for a long moment. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Morrison waved his hand dismissively. Fine. Get back to work, all of you. The party isn't over. The crowd began to disperse, conversations resuming as if nothing had happened. Victoria Thornton was led away by one of the other staff members, still complaining loudly about her dress. The orchestra started playing again. Elena remained standing where she was, tray still in her hands. Chloe touched her arm gently. Are you okay? she asked softly. Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. I'm sorry about my father, Chloe continued. He can be cruel. He doesn't see people sometimes. He just sees what he expects to see. It's fine, miss, Elena managed to say. Thank you for speaking up. Chloe looked like she wanted to say more, but another guest was calling her name. She gave Elena one last apologetic look before walking away. Elena stood alone in the middle of the grand ballroom. Around her, the party continued as if nothing had happened. The champagne flowed. The laughter rose and fell. The beautiful people in their beautiful clothes talked about their beautiful lives, and behind her, silent and waiting, the Steinway piano gleamed under the light of the crystal chandeliers. Elena did not look at it. She could not afford to look at it. Because if she looked at it, she might remember who she used to be. And remembering that would make everything so much harder. She picked up her tray and walked back toward the kitchen. Her head held as high as she could manage. But the night was not over yet. And neither was her story. Elena stayed in the kitchen for as long as she could. She stood near the sink, pretending to arrange appetizers on a fresh tray while her hands trembled slightly. The other servers moved around her, too busy with their own tasks to notice the tears she was fighting to hold back. The head chef shouted orders. Dishes clattered. Steam rose from pots on the stove. It was loud and chaotic, and exactly what Elena needed right now. Noise to drown out the voice in her head that kept replaying Morrison's words over and over again. These people have no training, no education, no understanding of how things work in our world. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought about Rosa, who was probably studying at the kitchen table right now. Textbooks spread out in front of her. She thought about Miguel, who always kissed her cheek before going to bed, even though he was 16 and too old for such things. She thought about the rent that was due next week and the electricity bill that had been higher than expected last month. This was why she stayed silent. This was why she swallowed her pride and let rich men treat her like she was nothing, because her children deserved better than what she had, and if she had to suffer a little humiliation to give them that chance, then so be it. She picked up her tray and walked back toward the ballroom. The party had returned to normal. The guests had already forgotten about the wine incident, or at least they were pretending to forget. That was how it worked in these circles. Scandal was entertaining for a moment, but then everyone moved on to the next glass of champagne, the next piece of gossip, the next distraction. Elena resumed her rounds, moving through the crowd like a ghost. She kept her eyes down, her smile fixed, her movements careful. She did not go near Victoria Thornton. She did not go near Richard Morrison. She stayed close to the edges of the room, where the shadows were deeper and the attention was less. But no matter where she went, she could not escape the piano. It sat in the corner like an old friend, beautiful and patient. Every time she turned around, there it was. Every time she thought she had put it out of her mind, her eyes found their way back to those black and white keys. She remembered the first time she had ever touched a piano. She was 5 years old, standing in her grandmother's living room in Buenos Aires. The piano was old and out of tune, but to Elena it was the most magical thing she had ever seen. Her grandmother had lifted her onto the bench and placed her small fingers on the keys. "Play," her grandmother had said. "Just play what you feel." And Elena had played. Not well, not correctly, but with a joy that she had never felt before. From that moment on, music had become her whole world. She had studied at the best conservatory in Argentina. She had performed in concert halls across South America, then in Europe. Critics had called her gifted, brilliant, a once-in-a-generation talent. She had been on her way to becoming one of the great pianists of her time. And then, life had happened. Her husband's illness, the medical bills that piled up faster than they could pay them, his death, which had broken something inside her that she was still trying to fix, the debts that followed, the loss of their home, the desperate decision to move to America with 2 children and nothing but a suitcase and a prayer. That was 10 years ago. She had not touched a piano since. Elena shook her head, pushing the memories away. The past was a luxury she could not afford. She had appetizers to serve and a job to keep. But the night, it seemed, had other plans. It started with a commotion near the stage. Elena heard raised voices, then saw several staff members rushing toward the small platform where the orchestra was set up. Something was wrong. She moved closer, curiosity getting the better of her. A small crowd had gathered around a man in a tuxedo who was sitting on a chair, his face pale and sweaty. It was the pianist, the one who had been hired to perform the evening's entertainment. He looked like he was about to be sick. "I'm sorry," the pianist was saying, his voice weak. "I don't know what's wrong. I felt fine an hour ago. But now, I can't. I'm sorry. I just can't." Richard Morrison pushed through the crowd, his face already red with frustration. "What do you mean you can't? I'm paying you a fortune to perform tonight." "I think it's food poisoning," the pianist said miserably. "Or maybe a stomach bug. Either way, I can barely stand up. There's no way I can play." Morrison looked like he wanted to explode. The gala's entertainment was ruined. His perfect party was falling apart. Elena could see him calculating the damage, the embarrassment, the whispered comments, the stories that would spread through his social circle about the night Richard Morrison's charity gala fell flat. "This is unacceptable," Morrison hissed. "Find me someone else. Find me anyone who can play." "Find." The catering manager spread his hands helplessly. "Sir, I don't know any pianists. This isn't exactly something we planned for." Morrison turned to his guests, desperation creeping into his voice. "Does anyone here play the piano? Anyone at all?" Silence. The wealthy guests looked at each other uncomfortably. These were people who collected art, who bought pianos as decorations for their living rooms, who attended concerts and opera performances, but actually playing an instrument? That was for other people. That was for the help. Elena felt something stir inside her chest. It was a strange feeling, like a door that had been locked for 10 years was suddenly rattling on its hinges. "Don't," she told herself. "Don't even think about it." But she was thinking about it. She was thinking about the Steinway grand piano sitting in the corner, silent and waiting. She was thinking about how it would feel to sit on that bench again, to place her fingers on those keys, to let the music flow through her the way it used to. She was thinking about the look on Richard Morrison's face when he had mocked her. She probably doesn't even know what this instrument is. Before she could stop herself, Elena set down her tray. "I can play," she said. Her voice was quiet, but somehow it carried across the room. Heads turned. Eyes found her. For the second time that night, she was the center of attention. Richard Morrison stared at her as if she had just announced she could fly. Then he laughed. "You?" His voice dripped with disbelief. "The help? The woman who can't even carry a tray without spilling wine?" A few guests chuckled nervously. Elena felt her cheeks burn, but she did not look away. "I can play," she repeated, her voice steadier now. "If you'll let me." Morrison's laugh grew louder. He turned to his guests, inviting them to share in the joke. "Did you hear that? The cleaning lady thinks she can play my $300,000 Steinway. This, I have to see." More laughter, more mocking smiles. Elena stood her ground, though every instinct told her to run, to take back her words, to disappear back into the shadows where she belonged. Then Chloe stepped forward again. "Let her try, Father." Morrison's smile faded slightly. "Chloe, don't be ridiculous." "What's ridiculous about it?" Chloe crossed her arms. "You don't have anyone else. The guests are expecting entertainment. What's the worst that can happen? She plays badly, and we all have a good laugh? At least it's something." Morrison hesitated. He looked at the sick pianist, at his waiting guests, at the expensive piano that had never been played at one of his parties. He was trapped, and he knew it. Finally, he waved his hand toward the Steinway with a mocking flourish. "Fine," he said. "Go ahead then. Entertain us." Elena felt her heart pounding in her chest. What had she done? She had not played in 10 years. Her fingers had forgotten the feel of the keys. Her muscles had forgotten the movements. What if she sat down and nothing came out? What if she made a fool of herself in front of all these people? But it was too late to turn back now. She walked toward the piano, feeling 50 pairs of eyes on her back. The room had gone quiet. Even the orchestra members were watching, curious to see what would happen. She reached the piano and ran her fingers lightly along its polished surface. It was cool and smooth, like touching an old friend's hand after years apart. She sat down on the bench and adjusted its height, just the way she used to. She placed her fingers on the keys, and for a moment, she was not a housekeeper. She was not a widow. She was not a woman who had been mocked and humiliated. She was Elena Vasquez, pianist, and she was about to remind everyone in this room exactly what that meant. The ballroom was completely silent. Elena sat on the piano bench, her hands resting on her lap, her eyes closed. She could feel every pair of eyes in the room fixed on her back. She could hear the soft shuffle of expensive shoes on marble as guests positioned themselves for a better view. She could sense their anticipation, not the kind that hoped for something beautiful, but the kind that expected a disaster. They were waiting for her to fail. Richard Morrison stood near the front of the crowd, a smug smile on his face. He had already prepared his reaction, the disappointed headshake, the condescending comment about knowing better than to let the help touch his things. He was looking forward to this. One more chance to put her in her place. Elena took a breath. Her fingers were trembling. 10 years. It had been 10 years since she had touched a piano. 10 years since she had let music flow through her. 10 years since she had been anyone other than a housekeeper, a widow, a woman trying to survive. What if she had forgotten everything? What if her fingers no longer remembered the movements they had practiced for thousands of hours? What if she opened her mouth to sing, and no sound came out? She thought about leaving. She could stand up right now, apologize, admit that she had made a mistake. She could go back to the kitchen, finish her shift, collect her pay, and pretend this night had never happened. That would be the safe thing to do. The smart thing. But then she remembered Morrison's voice. These people have no training, no education, no understanding. She remembered the laughter of the guests. The way they had looked at her like she was less than human. The way Victoria Thornton had recoiled from her touch, as if she were diseased. And she remembered something else. Something her grandmother had told her many years ago. Back in that small living room in Buenos Aires. Music is not in your fingers, Elena. It is in your soul. And the soul never forgets. Elena opened her eyes. She placed her fingers on the keys. They were cool and smooth, exactly as she remembered. The weight of the keys beneath her fingertips felt like coming home after a long journey. Her body remembered this position, the straight back, the relaxed shoulders, the gentle curve of the wrists. She began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant. It was the opening of Chopin's Ballade No. 1-inch G minor, a piece she had performed dozens of times in her previous life. A piece that had always felt like it was written just for her. The melody drifted through the ballroom like a whisper, delicate and searching. A few guests exchanged surprised glances. This was not what they had expected. This was not the clumsy fumbling of an amateur. This was something else entirely. Elena's fingers moved across the keys, finding their way through the familiar passages. It was like riding a bicycle, she realized. The muscle memory was still there, buried beneath 10 years of mopping floors and scrubbing toilets and pretending to be invisible. Her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The music grew stronger. The melody began to build, layer upon layer, climbing towards something powerful and inevitable. Elena felt herself disappearing into the notes, becoming one with the piano, losing herself in the story the music was telling. And what a story it was. Chopin had written this piece about longing and loss, about beauty and tragedy, about the way life can break your heart and still leave room for hope. Elena had always loved this piece, but she had never truly understood it until now. Now she knew what it meant to lose everything. Now she knew what it meant to start over from nothing. Now she knew what it meant to find strength in the deepest darkness. She played with everything she had. The ballroom had gone completely still. No one was whispering anymore. No one was reaching for their champagne glasses. No one was checking their phones or looking at their watches. Every single person in that room was frozen in place, Caught in the spell of the music, Morrison's smile had faded. His face had gone pale. He was staring at Elena with an expression that might have been shock, or disbelief, or something close to fear. This was not possible. This could not be happening. The cleaning woman, the servant, the invisible nobody, she could not be playing like this, but she was. Elena reached the heart of the piece, the section that had always moved her to tears. Her fingers flew across the keys with a speed and precision that seemed almost superhuman. The notes poured out of her like water from a broken dam. Years of silence and suppression finally finding release. She thought about her husband, about the way he used to sit in the corner of the room while she practiced, his eyes closed, a peaceful smile on his face. She thought about her children, about all the sacrifices she had made to give them a better life. She thought about her grandmother, who had first placed her fingers on a piano and told her to play what she felt. She thought about all the times she had been ignored, dismissed, overlooked, all the times she had swallowed her pride and accepted insults with a polite smile, all the times she had hidden who she really was because the world did not want to see it. Tonight, they would see. The music soared toward its climax. Elena's whole body moved with the rhythm. Her eyes closed, her face transformed by an expression of pure joy. This was who she was. This was who she had always been. Not a housekeeper. Not a servant. Not a nobody. She was an artist. And art could not be silenced forever. The final notes rang out through the ballroom, powerful and triumphant. Elena held the last chord for a long moment, letting it fade slowly into silence. Then she lifted her hands from the keys and let them rest in her lap. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched on, heavy and absolute. Elena kept her eyes closed, afraid to look, afraid to see the judgment on their faces. Had she made a terrible mistake? Had she embarrassed herself even more than before? Then someone started clapping. It was Chloe. She stood near the edge of the crowd, her hands coming together in slow, deliberate applause. Her eyes were bright with tears. Another person joined in. Then another. And then the whole room exploded. The applause was thunderous. It echoed off the high ceilings and rattled the crystal chandeliers. People were standing now, rising from their seats, their faces transformed by wonder and amazement. Some of them were crying. Some of them were shouting bravo. All of them were looking at Elena with new eyes. Victoria Thornton, the woman whose dress had been stained, stood near the piano, with tears streaming down her face. Her hands were pressed to her heart, and she was shaking her head slowly, as if she could not believe what she had just witnessed. Elena finally opened her eyes. The sight before her was overwhelming. All these wealthy, powerful people who had looked down on her just minutes ago, they were now looking up at her with awe and respect, and something close to reverence. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady, her heart pounding in her chest. She did not know what to do. She had not expected this. She had not expected anything close to this. The applause continued. Wave after wave of it, washing over her like warm water. For the first time in 10 years, Elena felt like herself again. Not the woman who cleaned other people's houses, not the widow who had lost everything, but the pianist, the artist, the woman who had once made audiences weep with the beauty of her music. She looked out at the crowd, at all these strangers who had just witnessed something they would never forget. And for the first time that night, she smiled, a real smile. The kind that comes from deep inside, from a place that has been dark for too long, and is finally seeing light again. In the corner of her eye, she could see Richard Morrison. His face was white. His hands hung limply at his sides. He looked like a man who had just discovered that everything he believed was wrong. And perhaps, Elena thought, that was the most satisfying part of all. The applause lasted for nearly 3 minutes. Elena stood beside the piano, overwhelmed by the sound, by the faces looking up at her with wonder, by the tears she could see glistening on cheeks that had been cold and judgmental just moments ago. She did not know what to do with her hands, so she simply clasped them in front of her, her fingers still tingling from the keys. When the clapping finally faded, the questions began. A woman in a blue gown rushed forward, her champagne forgotten on a nearby table. "Who are you?" she demanded, but not in a cruel way. Her voice was filled with genuine curiosity, even desperation. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Others followed, crowding around Elena like she was a celebrity, which in a way, she supposed she once had been. They wanted to know everything. Where had she trained? Who were her teachers? Had she performed professionally? Why was she working as a servant? Elena looked at their eager faces and felt something shift inside her. For 10 years, she had hidden her past like it was something to be ashamed of. She had buried her identity beneath uniforms and aprons and polite smiles. She had convinced herself that the woman she used to be was gone forever. But that woman was still here. She had always been here, waiting for the right moment to return. "My name is Elena Vasquez," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I trained at the National Conservatory in Buenos Aires. I performed across South America and Europe for 15 years. I played in concert halls in Paris, Vienna, Madrid, and Rome. Critics called me one of the most promising pianists of my generation." The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word. "Then my husband got sick," Elena continued. "Cancer. The treatments were expensive, and our insurance did not cover everything. I stopped performing to take care of him. We sold our home, our savings, everything we had. It was not enough. He died anyway." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the room. A few women dabbed at their eyes with expensive handkerchiefs. "After he passed, I was left with nothing. No money, no home, no career. Just 2 children who needed their mother to be strong. So I brought them here, to America, to start over. I took whatever work I could find, cleaning houses, serving food, becoming invisible." She looked around at the guests, at their designer clothes and glittering jewelry, at the champagne glasses and the crystal chandeliers. These people had never known what it felt like to lose everything. They had never known the humiliation of going from concert halls to cleaning toilets. They had never had to choose between buying groceries and paying the electricity bill. "For 10 years, I did not touch a piano," Elena said softly. "I thought that part of my life was over. I thought I had to let go of who I was in order to become who I needed to be for my children." She turned and looked at the Steinway, its black surface gleaming under the lights. "But tonight, I remembered something important. You can take away someone's home. You can take away their money, their career, their place in the world. But you cannot take away their soul. And music. Music lives in the soul." The room was absolutely still. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the servers had stopped in their tracks, trays balanced on their hands, watching this moment unfold. Then Elena turned to face Richard Morrison. He had not moved from his spot near the front of the crowd. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. The arrogance that had defined him all evening was gone, replaced by something that might have been shame, or confusion, or fear. Elena walked toward him slowly, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The crowd parted to let her through, watching in breathless anticipation. She stopped directly in front of him. "Mr. Morrison," she said calmly. "Earlier tonight, you looked at me and saw nothing. You saw a servant, a nobody, someone without education, without refinement, without worth." Morrison opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "That is your poverty," Elena continued. "Not mine. I may clean your floors, but I know who I am. I know what I am capable of. I know my value, even when the world refuses to see it." She reached behind her back and untied her apron. The simple white fabric had been her uniform, her disguise, her cage. She folded it neatly and placed it on the piano bench. "I will not be needing this anymore," she said. Then she turned and walked toward the door. The crowd parted for her like water around a stone. Some people reached out to touch her arm, to offer words of admiration and apology. Victoria Thornton stepped into her path, her eyes red from crying. "I am so sorry," Victoria whispered, "for how I treated you earlier. I had no idea." Elena paused and looked at the woman who had screamed at her over a spilled glass of wine. She could have been cruel. She could have reminded Victoria of every harsh word, every disgusted look, every moment of humiliation. Instead, she simply nodded. "We all make mistakes," Elena said gently. "What matters is what we do after." She continued toward the door. Chloe was waiting there, her face glowing with pride and emotion. "That was the most incredible thing I have ever witnessed," Chloe said, her voice thick with tears. "Will you be okay?" Elena smiled, a real smile, full of warmth and hope. "I think so. For the first time in a long time, I think I will be okay." She stepped out into the cool night air, leaving the mansion and all its glittering guests behind. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Someone at the party had recorded Elena's performance on their phone. They posted it online. And within days, it had been viewed millions of times. The story spread across social media and news outlets. Housekeeper stuns millionaire's gala with piano mastery. The servant who silenced the rich. Elena Vasquez. A star reborn. Offers began pouring in. Music schools wanted her to teach. Concert halls wanted her to perform. Documentary filmmakers wanted to tell her story. After a decade of invisibility, Elena Vasquez was suddenly the most talked about musician in the country. She was careful about which opportunities she accepted. She had learned that fame was fleeting, and she had no interest in becoming a spectacle. What she wanted was simpler than that. She wanted to play again. She wanted to teach others. She wanted to show her children that it was never too late to reclaim your dreams. She accepted a position at a prestigious music academy, where she taught young pianists who reminded her of herself at their age, hungry, passionate, desperate to turn their love of music into something more. She also began performing again. Small concerts at first, then larger ones, as word spread about the woman, with the extraordinary story, and the even more extraordinary talent. 1 year after the night that changed everything, Elena Vasquez stood on the stage of Carnegie Hall. The audience was packed. Critics and celebrities and ordinary music lovers had come from all over the world to hear her play. The house lights dimmed. The spotlight found her at the piano, and as she placed her fingers on the keys, she felt a peace that she had not known in many years. She thought about her grandmother, who had first taught her to play. She thought about her husband, who had always believed in her. She thought about Rosa and Miguel, who were sitting in the front row, their faces shining with pride. And she thought about Richard Morrison, who was somewhere in that audience too. He had purchased a ticket like everyone else. He had waited in line like everyone else. He had come to hear the woman he had once mocked, the servant, the nobody, the cleaning lady, perform on one of the most famous stages in the world. Elena smiled to herself. Then she began to play. And the music, as always, spoke for itself.